Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my final Would You Read It Challenge video for 2022. In fact, it is my Would You Read It Challenge where I look back on my reading in 2022. The Would You Read It Challenge was a meme started by @2Brody, who I'll link down below, and I was tagged a year ago by Weston Reads to do this tag, and since then I've kind of made it into my own thing. The point of the tag is to pick a variety of books by whatever means I think you want to, and only read to your audience the first sentence of the books and then ask them, would you want to continue from there? But I decided that's too small, so I do a couple of paragraphs per book. And the first thing I did is I started going through all of my years on BookTube, and I did the 12 books that I started out each of the 12 months with. And then I ran out of years I was on BookTube, so at the back half of this year, I did a couple of Would You Read It challenges for the BookTube prize, which I adore, and I hope to get back to next year. But to round out this year, I thought I'd go back to my original and look at 2022 in the same way, looking at the first books that I read per month. And it gives a sort of fake bird's eye view of my reading, which really isn't all that genuine to my actual reading habits, I don't think. I read a variety of books, but in fact, there's some patterns for the beginning of the months, which I'll discuss after I do all the readings. So anyway, without further ado, I guess I'll get into this. I will read the first couple of paragraphs, then I will give the name of the book, and then how I personally classed it on Goodreads with my own personal classification system. So, starting with January. Huaui River Plains, southern Henan, 1345. Zhongli village lay flattened under the sun like a defeated dog that has given up on finding shade. All around there was nothing but bare yellow earth, cracked into the pattern of a turtle shell, and the sear-bone smell of hot dust. It was the 4th year of the drought. Knowing the cause of their suffering, the peasants cursed their barbarian emperor and his distant capital in the north. As with any two like things connected by a thread of qi, whereby the actions of one influence the other even at a distance, so the emperor's worthiness determines the fate of the land he rules. The worthy ruler's dominion is graced with good harvests, the unworthy's is cursed by flood, drought, and disease. The present ruler of the empire of the Great Wan was not only emperor but great Khan too. He was the 10th in the line of the Mongol conqueror Kubili Khan, who had defeated the last native dynasty 70 years before. He had held the divine light of the mandate of heaven for 11 years, and already there were 10-year-olds who knew nothing but disaster. And that was from She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan, which I classed as speculative fiction. February. A note from Penina. Before a crowd of Israeli Jews at a peace demonstration, in the same square where an Israeli man, certain he was right, shot Yitzhak Rabin, Suleiman Khatib stood on a stage. It was 2014, the war in Gaza not yet over. In Sderot and sometimes Tel Aviv, Israelis were ducking for cover. In Gaza, the death count was rising. That summer would see the deaths of approximately 70 Israelis and 2,200 Palestinians. Looking down at a piece of paper, holding a microphone, Suleiman wore a shirt that read, "Combatants for Peace." On his chest, 2 silhouettes threw their weapons behind them, as if recklessly. From the stage, Suleiman began to speak to the crowd in his Arabic-accented Hebrew. It was a rare moment of solemnity for him, his words slow and deliberate. And that was from In This Place Together, A Palestinian's Journey to Collective Liberation by Penina Alberg Schwartz. March. Many religious Jews offer arguments for why their faith represents the truth. They try to prove that God exists, that a revelation took place at Mount Sinai, and that the Torah is the Word of God. At the same time, many secular Jews offer arguments for why their lack of faith represents the truth. They try to prove that God does not exist, that the revelation at Mount Sinai is a myth, that the Torah is a fable. These opposing views represent a profound clash of ideas, but they are not the core of the argument tearing the Jewish people, particularly the Israeli Jewish society, apart. The argument stirring up the Jewish world is not over which side is right about God and Revelation, but which belief offers a better, more empowering way forward. Does religious life enrich our world or limit it? Does a secular life liberate us or limit us? This polemic will become clear in the two arguments in which I begin this book. Let us try to be persuaded by them both. And that was from The Wandering Jew, Israel and the Search for Jewish Identity by Micah Goodman, which I classed as nonfiction. April. The hills of Jerusalem are a bath of fog. Rami moves by memory through a straight stretch and calculates the camber of an upcoming turn. 67 years old, he bends low on his motorbike, his jacket padded, his helmet clipped tight. It is a Japanese bike, 750cc, an agile machine for a man his age. Rami pushes the bike hard, even in bad weather. He takes a sharp turn at the gardens where the fog lifts to reveal dark. Corpus separatum. He downshifts and whips past a military tower. The sodium lights appear fuzzy in the morning. A small flock of birds momentarily darkens the orange. At the bottom of the hill, the road dips into another curve, obscured in fog. He taps down to second, lets out the clutch, catches the corner smoothly, and moves back up to third. Road number 1 stretches above the ruins of Qualunya, all history piled here. And that was from Apeirogon by Colum McCann, which I classed as Jewish fiction. May. In the beginning were the fields. Back then, Othniel Assis was living in Ma'ale Hermesh, merrily raising a goat and growing arugula and cherry tomatoes in his backyard. The goat was for his kids, the arugula and tomatoes for his wife Rachel's salads. And Othniel saw that it was good, and he tired of his job as a bookkeeper, and he found himself a small plot of land within the bounds of the settlement on which to expand his crops. As fate would have it, however, the field bordered on the vineyards of another settler, whose grapes produced boutique wines that were sold to Tel Aviv's Golden Apple restaurant and other fine dining establishments, including, the Vintner claimed, several in the Dordogne region of France, and Paris too. And the Vintner turned up his nose, declaring he had received a permit from the regional council to plant additional vineyards on the very plot of land that had caught Othniel's fancy. The soil, he insisted, along with the cold winters and temperate summer nights, had imbued his grapes with an outstanding quality, a unique terroir, which produced a full-bodied wine with a nutty aroma. And that was from The Hilltop by Asaf Gavron, translated by Stephen Cohen, which I classed as Jewish fiction. June. Edwin St. John Andrew, 18 years old, hauling the weight of his double-sainted name across the Atlantic by steamship, eyes narrowed against the wind of the upper deck. He holds the railing with his gloved hands, impatient for a glimpse of the unknown, and trying to discern something, anything, beyond the sea and sky, but all he sees are shades of endless gray. He's on his way to a different world. He's more or less in the hallway between England and Canada. I've been sent into exile, he tells himself, and he knows he's being melodramatic, but nevertheless there's a ring of truth to it. Edwin's ancestors include William the Conqueror. When Edwin's grandfather dies, his father will become an earl, and Edwin went to 2 of the best schools in the country. But there was never much of a future for him back in England. There are very few professions that a gentleman can take up, and none of them are of interest to Edwin. The family estate is destined to go to his oldest brother, Gilbert, so he stands to inherit nothing. The middle brother, Niall, is in Australia already. Edwin might have clung to England a little longer, but he holds secretly radical views which emerged unexpectedly at a dinner party, thus speeding up his fate. And that was from Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel, which I classed as speculative fiction. July. Elisabetta, May 1957. Elisabetta had kept this secret for 13 years, but it was time to tell her son who his father was. She had been waiting until he was old enough, but she didn't want to delay any longer. He deserved to know the truth, and she had never been comfortable concealing it from him. The secret had grown harder to keep over time, like a bag of groceries carried on the first block, then the second, but by the third must be set down. She stood at the kitchen sink, finishing her coffee, and the apartment was quiet and still, as her son was out playing soccer. She prepared herself for the conversation, realizing she would have to relive the worst days of her life, and even of her country's history, since her youth had encompassed the Ventennio, the 20 years of Mussolini's rule, and a war that had turned Italy topsy-turvy, during which the good had become bad, and the bad had become powerful. And that was from Eternal by Lisa Scottolini, which I classed as Jewish fiction. August. The young bride, who had been locked in her room in utter silence for more than 5 hours, finally made her announcement and repeated the astonishing declaration 3 times from behind the closed door, through which 4 pairs of ears listened anxiously and with the utmost devotion. "Not getting married, not getting married, not getting married," she recited in a flat, almost bored voice that sounded extremely distant and nebulous, like the final vapors of a scented cleaning spray. The 3 of them were crowded into the sad hallway. The grandmother had been placed upon a wicker stool opposite the door, where her feet had grown weary from the long wait, and avoided looking at one another for a long time, as though any eye contact might turn the declaration they just heard into a solid fact, confirming not only its content but worse, its significance. And so they simply continued to stare at the shut door with its old-fashioned dark wood veneer, seemingly anticipating a thawing, a softening, a miraculous melting, if not of the bride, then at least of the door, and hoping for something further, a continuation of the sentence, an idea or a word that might emerge through the door like the wet hand of a newborn, closely followed by the body itself sliding out. And that was from And the Bride Closed the Door by Ronit Madelon, translated by Jessica Cohen, which I classed as Jewish fiction. September. Before. He always set aside 12 days of his annual retreat to finish reports and studies, and that left 12 more for everything else. In earlier times, he had foolishly tried retreats within the calm reach of his workplace, and that was not at all helpful. There would always be some crisis, something for which his help would be required. As his salary and sense increased, he took his retreats farther and farther away, until at last he found himself going off-planet to distant temples, where the rule of silence and solitude could not be broken by convenient technologies. This season he had chosen Garvey, a place with small wooden buildings scattered around the huge temple of stone, all set within the rain shadow of a mountain range. An endless ocean, both vista and inspiration, rain parallel to the mountains and a beach between the two, offered long walks to nowhere on either side. A place of 2 deserts, some said, for sea and land were bleak together, one boundless, one narrow, both thirsty. And that was from The Best of All Possible Worlds by Karen Lord, which I classed as speculative fiction. October. Molly, September 1961. 31 years before Molly dies on Mount Aragats. Philadelphia. "It cost $200, Papa said in his thick accent, waving his arm at the exhaust belching from the truck that had just pulled away. He pointed to the pile it had left behind, concrete blocks, mortar, wooden beams, and nails. Everything lay in a disjointed heap next to the back door of their butcher shop. Manya, though no one called her Manya anymore, stood next to him and her mother, staring at the delivery. She was 10 years old and constantly frustrated by her parents' choices, like this one, always trying to help them make better ones. It was why she had renamed herself Molly when she started kindergarten. Her parents, Yulia and Lazar, embraced this decision, praised her for it, because Manya was Soviet, Molly was American, and while they didn't agree on much, all 3 were eager to leave the USSR behind. Now her parents were convinced this pile of construction materials would help them live like real Americans, and Molly needed them to understand that this was ridiculous. And that was from Atomic Anna by Rachel Barenbaum, which I classed as Jewish fiction. November. Translator's note. How about Zatelsk? What? Should Zatelsk be capitalized in American? Yo. Why? Gittel shrugged. Maybe a dust village is more like a person than a god. How about Philadelphia, then? You decide. Is your Philadelphia more like a person or a god? Well, what is God, Conradus? A false hope. I'll drink to that. And a person? A thing made from Mises and Taive and all the small choices of each moment. And that was from Before All the World by Muriel Rothman Zecher, which I classed as Jewish fiction. And finally, December. From England, my brother set up the Zoom calls every Sunday, our boisterous lockdown ritual. 2 siblings joining from Lagos, 3 of us from the United States, and my parents, sometimes echoey and crackly, from Aba, our ancestral hometown in southeastern Nigeria. On 7 June, there was my father, only his forehead on the screen, as usual, because he never quite knew how to hold his phone during video calls. "Move your phone a bit, Daddy," one of us would say. My father was teasing my brother Oki about a new nickname. Then he was saying he hadn't had dinner because they'd had a late lunch. Then he was talking about the billionaire from the next town who wanted to claim our village's ancestral land. He felt a bit unwell, had been sleeping poorly, but we were not to worry. On 9 June, Oki went to Abba to see him and said he looked tired. On 9 June, I kept our chat brief so that he could rest. He laughed quietly when I did my playful imitation of a relative. Hachi Fo, he said, good night, his last words to me. On 10 June, he was gone. My brother Chuck's called to tell me, and I came undone. And that was from Notes on Grief by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, which I classed as memoir. Okay, so some thoughts. Many of those months, particularly in the beginning of the year, started with books that I was reading for my synagogue's Israel book club, that I wanted to read, before the deadline, the looming deadline, which I think was the first Tuesday of the month when we met. So I feel like Jewish fiction is perhaps a bit outsized, although I tend to read a lot of it, and there was a lot more even beyond the first half of the month that I read. So what do you know? It was mostly Jewish fiction, I think, just a tiny bit of speculative fiction and nonfiction / memoir, but certainly not as diverse as I would hope the rest of my reading was this year, at least to an extent. But in terms of my feelings for these books, I think overall I felt they were okay. In terms of the fiction that I read for the Israel Book Club, I remember how I was disappointed by Apeirogon, that I thought it was style over substance. And then I was shocked at how much I liked The Hilltop, which was satirical, and illegal settlements in the West Bank, but still, I really felt that worked for me. I'm still pleasantly surprised by that one. My least favorite probably was Eternal by Lisa Scottolini, which I read with another book club, my mom and auntie's book club. And my mom and I were the snobs about that. She was even worse than I was. I thought that it was like overwrought and melodramatic, and I don't know. It was impressive in its way for its historical research, but I don't know. I was not so taken with the melodrama, but everyone else in the group, even my father, who joined us for the first time, really liked it, I think. My favorites, I don't know which to pick from these two, but have to be The Sea of Tranquility and also Notes on Grief. I love those authors, I love the stories they're telling, I love the ways they use language to tell it and other storytelling techniques, so it worked for me. Then there's the two books I own, The Best of All Possible Worlds. I didn't like as much as I hoped. I think it was a little too philosophical and the characters didn't come alive as much for me, which I was a little disappointed by because I was hoping I'd like the way that it delved into religion in a science fiction environment, or culture really more than religion, but it didn't work for me as much as I hoped it would, so I do think I'll be trying to get rid of it. And then there's The Wandering Jew, which I might hold on to a little longer, particularly because I'm back in my Israel book club this year, and my rabbi decided that we were going to reread all of the nonfiction and then choose new fiction. So we will be reading this book again in a couple of months, and I'm not sure if I'm going to reread it because I'm always overwhelmed by all the new books I always want to read. But I should maybe at least skim through it again, justify this purchase and grapple with it a little bit more, because I just remember, we had mixed feelings about it. And I feel like this really does merit a second look. That intro to me felt a little simplified, and I'm hoping maybe I could dig deeper into some of the themes he has in here. I think his major impetus, which is of interest to me, is how he's trying to create this sort of middle ground in Israeli society between the stereotypical religious and secular, and trying to find like a middle path where maybe people could accept more nuance, and that's always something I like. And I guess as a final note, because I feel like I don't have to talk about every book on here, I'll talk about Before All the World by Muriel Rothman Zecher, which is very experimental literary fiction, not to everybody's taste, but I would very much encourage people to listen to the audiobook for that one, which the author narrates, and it just gets into the cadence and the rhythm of this Yinglish that he's delving into. Like, some of it is his own sort of translation work, as you will. By the way, this started as with a translator's note, which I think it confused some people on Goodreads, and they thought it was actual translation, but actually the translator and all of that is a fictional construct. It's all written in English/Yinglish by Muriel Rothman-Sacker. But anyway, I added a meta fourth dimension or something in here because I went ahead and I actually translated a couple of the final Yiddish words in here, the ones in brackets, to the best of my knowledge, which is hopefully decent enough, and I'm not messing too much with the author's words. And that about covers it for me now. I will leave my reviews on Goodreads for all 12 of these books listed down below, as well as my playlist on YouTube where I've done other tag videos, especially this Would You Read It Challenge video, both for my annual reading and then for the BookTube prize. I'm definitely looking forward to getting back to the BookTube prize for this tag because it's only half as many books, a lot easier to get through. So yeah. But before all of that, I should hopefully be back on this channel very soon. I still have a couple more videos I want to cram into the end of the year, starting with my final video in memorial of my cat, Missy, who died in September. And throughout the years that I had her, you know, she's appeared on some of my videos, so I'm compiling some of that footage. And I basically have one more year of her life left, and so I'm just going to go ahead and compile that quickly as my final tribute. And then after that, I think I'll be compiling another sort of video, my vlog for Hanukkah, where I am reading from a short story collection, one Jewish short story per night of Hanukkah. So it's a long, geeky review, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I hope everyone who is celebrating has a very, very Merry Christmas. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. And I'll see you next time.